Good afternoon. My name is Ronan McLeod from Box Media, and I'm here today with Dr. Sarah Kieran, founder of the Chemie Business School Work Futures Lab at University of Limerick. Dr. Kieran, good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon indeed. Good afternoon, Ronan.
A new world of work. I understand this report into leadership reflections on the impact of COVID-19 is part of a broader stream of research into the future of work. Sarah, I'm just wondering, could you give us more of an insight into that element of the report?
Yes, indeed. The Chemie Business School have partnered with the Irish Centre for Business Excellence for about 3 years now, investigating the digital transformation of work and all the different dimensions and dynamics as a result of digital transformation. Our first piece of research into this looked specifically at the impact of digital transformation on service types of work. So basically office-based work, people working at desks, typically in large organizations, dealing with multiple systems, maybe multiple geographic locations, and multiple different types of business functions or domains. So we were looking at how the digitization of this work was affecting the job, the tasks they undertook, and then consequently the skills that they needed. Did they need to upskill or reskill? Were certain kind of tasks being replaced by new types of tasks? And we found some really interesting things around the value of social dynamics in the workplace and cognitive type skills. And we were just about to engage in a second wave of this research, specifically this time actually looking at graduates and how graduates transition into these more digitized workplaces when the pandemic hit last March 2020. So we took a step back, as everyone was doing at the time, and decided that rather than going straight in to survey graduates, it would be more appropriate to talk to leaders about where their heads were at now with this ongoing journey of digital transformation, but now in the context of a global pandemic. So that really was the genesis of this report.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you. And could you give us more of an insight into who these business leaders were?
Well, the Irish Centre for Business Excellence, it's a knowledge sharing network really targeted at large organisations who come together to share best practice. So that's really the main domain of the research, was in multinationals and large corporations. Though we did, however, include two small to medium sized, they weren't really micro businesses, they were around 200 employee sized small businesses. And we also interviewed two government agencies that would be engaged with large and small businesses, just to make sure that the SME perspective was included to some extent in the report.
Very good, very good. And what key issues did they highlight during the report?
Well, at the time, as you can imagine, last July and August, they were very much concentrated on reorienting the entire organisation to deal with the pandemic. However, some of the key findings also were really interesting lessons for us as we move forward, because what everybody, I think, acknowledges now is that the pandemic didn't significantly shift the workplace. Rather, it accelerated some trends that were already happening in the workplace. And some of those trends, one of them obviously would be the hybrid work model. So the concept that work is no longer a place, it's actually something that you do, and where you do it, and even when you do it, is open to some change, both from the employee side and the employer side. So that was one very significant finding that I suppose as researchers, we already knew this was an issue, or shall we say a phenomenon within a digitalized workplace. But the pandemic really pushed employees and employers alike to really start to engage with working from home and remote working. And from that, again, comes another key finding, which was around the social dynamics of work. Interestingly, we had already seen these issues, which was why we wanted to talk to graduates, because we had seen graduates come into these very advanced workplaces where people were working in a very virtual work environment. And we had seen how some graduates were struggling to connect with teams, to connect with the culture of the organization. Some graduates were feeling a little bit unsettled in organizations because of the dynamic nature, with some team members working from home, some coming in and out of the office more frequently, and being less frequently on site. Now everybody was experiencing these kind of social dimensions of work. So how teams connect in a physical space, but then in a virtual space when that team is blended, some working on site and some working from home. And also how leaders and managers connect with teams and individuals on teams. We've heard a lot in the pandemic about social isolation, but that could be as much a factor of the pandemic as it is of working from home. But into the future, as we engage hybrid work models and more people work from home on a sporadic basis or full-time in a remote working basis, line managers, middle managers, supervisors, team leads, and the organization's leadership itself will have to work a lot harder to maintain those team connections and those individual one-to-one connections, both from kind of a strategizing and an innovating perspective. So those business processes that are very social need to be kept alive, but also from an employee welfare perspective, and ensuring the well-being of every employee is safeguarded too.
I see. Very interesting. And where do you see the report and the research going to next, Sarah?
Unfortunately, we have more questions than answers at this point in time. Most organizations are still struggling with what this new world of work is going to look like. We are very much at a critical juncture. There's a societal push to engage with new types of working from a hybrid work model perspective. There's also a strong societal push around the meaning of work and the employee experience of work that leaders need to take very seriously. Organizations, many of them are very willing to engage in these new kind of work models, though it can be a bit polarized. We see some organizations saying, you can only come into the office a certain number of days, which may not sit well with some employees who like to be in the office. And then we see other organizations saying there will be no remote work or working from home at all. You have to be present, because recent legislation does give you the right to request working from home, but it doesn't guarantee anything. So I would be concerned about going to one of those poles. I think organizations and employees, very importantly, need to be comfortable with sitting in an uncertain place for a little bit of time. We can't rush out and make big decisions and policy make. We need to take things step by step. So I think understanding your employee's perspective, doing a lot of HR work around the different kinds of jobs that exist within the organization. There will be always jobs you can't work from home to do. And obviously you have to be careful not to segment your organization not too much, not to differentiate, because diversity and inclusion is a really interesting theme coming out of the report and into the future as well. So with all these questions and not enough answers, we're actually engaging now in a new wave of research. It's actually propelled us to form the Work Futures Lab in the Chemie Business School alongside the Irish Centre for Business Excellence, but also inviting in other agencies and other organisations, so that in a kind of an experimental research, active collaborative type of research space, we can figure out the answers to these important questions. We've just launched a survey called the Creating Work Futures Survey. So I would really hope that anyone listening to this would take the time to find that survey on the Irish Centre for Business Excellence homepage, or indeed on the KBS Work Futures Lab page, and complete it and share it. Because if we don't really understand what leaders are thinking, what managers are thinking, what employees are thinking, and the graduates that I mentioned that we were supposed to talk to last March but got pushed back a little bit, if we don't get people like this to tell us what their experience of work is like and what kind of expectations they have, not just about remote working, but about how they engage with technology in the workplace, how they want to be supported in the workplace, the struggles leaders have making sense of all of this in the workplace. If we don't get the answer to some of those critical questions now, we really are in a very, very uncertain space rather than in a somewhat uncertain space. So hopefully that survey will get a good response, and I might be back to you in a few months with some answers to some of those big questions.
I see. Very interesting. And where do you see the report and the research going to next, Sarah?
Well, it's interesting. Very often people look to researchers to answer these big questions, but I don't personally have all the answers. What I do have is an analytical skill set and some theoretical understanding of the world of work to go out and pick out best practice. So really the research comes after the experience of the organization. We look to an organization to see what have you tried, what's worked, what's not worked, because often we'll get some good insights from what doesn't work. We look to employees to try and understand their world and their expectations. And we look to managers and leaders to really tell us the hard and cold truth of what it is like bringing an organization through a digital transformation process, bringing an organization through a big cultural shift. So really, it's the collective answer of everyone working in organizations, small, medium, or large, who are all trying to do their best, getting it right sometimes, not getting it right others. But interestingly, often getting it right, but not realizing they're getting it right. And this is the researcher's role to make sense of all of that and then present it back in some kind of a best practice framework or model of work that we can experiment further with until we get it as close to right as we possibly can. And that's what the Work Futures Lab are doing. We have a lot of really interesting organizations who've stepped up to the plate to say, look, we'll share our stories with you privately, obviously. We'll open our doors to you to allow you come in and experiment with different work practices or leadership strategies. And over time, nothing will happen quickly, unfortunately, but over time, we will figure it out together. And that's really what the Work Futures Lab is about. And the ICBE membership network are very supportive of that work, which is great.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. I would just like to close by saying thank you to our author, Dr. Sarah Kieran, for her time today. And should you wish to receive a full copy of the report, please contact us at www.icbe.ie or at www.ul.ie. Thank you.
This research was commissioned and funded by the ICBE Advanced Productivity SkillNet. If you or your organisation would like to be part of the Creating Work Futures survey, please email me directly, vivian@icbe.ie.